Hello, here is myself using YouTube to try to answer questions from students in Ag Ed 311 about officer selection and development. And so the process we went through is each student at the beginning of the class session was given 3 index cards. They wrote the most pressing questions they had about developing an officer selection and development plan as an authentic assessment in their course, worth 15% of their grade. And as the course session went along, if I answered the question, they tore it up. And these were the ones that the students did not feel got answered during that time period because of our learning activities. And to release them, I collected the questions and told them I would respond via YouTube video. So the first question is there a specific length of time for the plan? Is there a specific length of time for the plan? You need to create your officer selection and development for at least the duration of the officer term. Now, I'd like to remind everybody that this can be for any student organization, but if it was for an FFA chapter, a typical term of office is 1 calendar year. But some collegiate organizations may have a term of office for 1 semester or academic term, if that makes sense. So the length of the selection and development plan should be for 1 calendar year, or excuse me, for the length of the term of the office. Is it better to choose officers based on past experiences or choose those that are new to leadership from your experience? Well, you're probably going to get a lot of these answers where I say it depends. It depends. To be honest, I think the most important criteria might be want to. How are we identifying those students who want to be successful, want to work hard, want to serve others? And then we have the year and the opportunity to develop their maximum skills as a future agent of change. So it depends on whether or not you'd like officers based on their past experience or those new to leadership. Probably some of both, but the most correct answer is it depends. Should there be requirements of students to be an officer? Well, I think so. And sometimes that helps address your need for having a certain level of experience. I'm going to give an example specifically to FFA. Very often, the FFA chapters require that students earn a certain degree through their SAE and other requirements to be eligible for that office. As we've talked about in FFA, there's the discovery degree as an 8th grader, a green hand degree, a chapter degree, a state FFA degree, and the American degree. To be a national FFA officer, you must have obtained the American FFA degree. To be a state FFA officer, you must have obtained the state FFA degree. To be a chapter FFA officer, that local advisor gets to sit in the Constitution and bylaws with the input from the members. What are the requirements for office? But very commonly, it is indicated that a student must earn a chapter FFA degree. And if you turn in the FFA manual and handbook you were given, you can see what the requirements are for the chapter FFA degree. How do you gauge or determine an officer budget? Well, how do you gauge or determine a personal budget? Depending on what money you have and what you have to invest, depends on what you can do and how creative you have to be. So think about your basic needs, think about the resources you have at hand, and say, are we serving the needs of the students? I hope that answers your question. Can officers choose to no longer be an officer, and can the president kick them out if they don't complete their duties? Well, of course, a student can choose to resign from office, just like anybody. We can't mandate that they continue, and that's never a positive situation. As far as one individual like the president being able to kick officers out, I suppose if your bylaws specifically wrote an answer that you could, but that's very uncommon and wouldn't be recommended to give that much power to one individual. Usually, if we have a parliamentary authority like Robert's Rules of Order, they actually indicate here is the process to hold a disciplinary hearing. I'm going to be very honest. With FFA chapters and in youth organizations, I have very rarely heard of students going through the entire process of a trial or a hearing to remove an office. Usually, the tool that's used to make sure that students are meeting their requirements is something we call officer contracts that are signed by the student, the parent, and the advisor. And that there's procedures in place that if we fail to meet that contract, what are the consequences for that? This is also kind of referred to as good classroom management. Those skills that we learn for teaching transfer to our advising of a youth organization. What are the final criterion for making final decisions? i.e. Bob and Jim both run for president and that very similar credential. How do you pick? See, that's why you're thinking through this selection process. And it's good that you're taking time to determine how are you going to determine it before it's an issue. So perhaps you have a nominating committee and they nominate which officers are eligible for president, and then the youth members have the opportunity to vote. And then what do you do if it's a tie vote? And you should probably have tie procedures built in to your election procedures. It's just about thinking ahead about that potential scenario and how you would address it. What are some different methods that officers can be selected? I actually believe we addressed that in class. We could use a nominating committee. We could use popular election. We could include campaigning. And there's a lot of different ways that we could use a conglomeration or a mixture of any of those brought together in selecting officers. We could just appoint as an advisor. As we discussed, pros and cons to all, and then how do we balance the need for youth voice, youth ownership, and also making sure that we have the most qualified candidates in the position for the success of a chapter where many young people are depending on it. What officers must I include in the officer selection assignment? Let's read that rubric. I don't believe it indicates that you have to include any office. You need to include enough officers to get the job done. At what point should an officer be removed from his or her position? Once again, we need to think through this. Think about officer contracts and think about what's best for that individual student for their long-term growth and development. Students must learn that there are consequences to failure to meet expectations, but they also must be given second chances and opportunities to succeed when they make mistakes, because we all make mistakes. And we only have 2 questions left. As an advisor, how do we ensure that we're not overloading our officer team, but also making sure they're getting the full experience? I think as an advisor, my focus and growth is going to be on the individual youth development, the individual growth of each officer from where they start to where they end. Did they increase their capacity as a leader and individual? Perhaps they need an individual leadership plan or a personal growth and development plan. Everybody would start at different points and everybody would end at different points. Now, as far as overloading a team, shouldn't the students indicate what they think that their organization should do? Shouldn't the students have an active voice of what should be happening and how we should be spending time? I think that we get in dangerous spots when the advisor is the one dictating the activities and involvement of the FFA chapter, and that perhaps we're missing the boat on the educational outcomes and purposes of this entire endeavor. And the last question, which I think was a loaded question for me, someone put in, can you still have a successful organization if you don't follow Robert's Rules of Order? No. Okay. Some of you know I'm a registered parliamentarian, active member of the National Association of Parliamentarians, and would believe that having Robert's Rules of Order would be critical. If you don't choose that parliamentary authority, because I believe in transparency and I don't believe in relying on custom and I don't believe in a good old boys network, you do need to indicate what are the rules of order that you're going to follow for your organization to conduct business. Now, Roberts is the identified parliamentary authority for over 90% of organizations in the United States of America. It's the one that's most commonly referenced and used, and I highly recommend it. But there are other parliamentary authorities. The key for a successful organization of transparency and of allowing many people to be involved is to indicate how are we going to conduct business? What are the rules of the game, if you will? Well, thank you for tuning in, and I hope that you found this video enlightening and education as we answer the questions that students had regarding their officer selection and development assignment for Ag Ed 311 in 2016. Thank you.